Setting environment variables is a basic skill every software developer needs to know. They're incredibly useful when it comes to storing and referencing configuration information. For example, if you use an API key, a database that has login credentials, or really anything your code needs to know to run effectively, environment variables can help you. Instead of hard-coding the values in your source, you can reference a set of variables that's defined on the machine where it's running. The process for setting environment variables is different on each operating system, so we'll be taking a look at Windows, macOS, and Ubuntu Linux. Let's start with Windows since it has a GUI. The other two don't. Go into the Control Panel and search for env, short for environment. You'll find the option for setting the environment variables in the list. Double-click it. Next, click the Environment Variables button. There are two sets of environment variables on Windows. The local variables, which are set by user. This is not generally what we want. The other kind are system-wide environment variables, which will work regardless of who is logged in. This is important because most of the time nobody at all is logged in for your code running on a server. So tying the variable to a user doesn't make sense. We'll use the system-wide variables down here. The most common variable to edit is the path variable. So tell me if this has ever happened to you before. You install some new program like Visual Studio Code or MySQL, but when you try to get to the new software from the command line, it tells you that it can't find what you're trying to run. This happens because the program you're trying to run isn't in the path. The path variable helps the operating system find executables and libraries on your computer. To edit the path variable, click Edit, and then add a folder containing an executable. The easy way to grab this without typing it is to use Explorer to get to the folder where your software is installed, and then simply copy the path from the address bar. I can then paste that into the environment variable and click OK to close out all the dialogues. From this point forward, you'll be able to access the programs in the folders stored in the path without CDing into any of the containing folders first, nor do you need to type an absolute path. Let's switch gears and go look at macOS. Here I am in the same Python project I was looking at on the PC. As before, if I try to run it, it won't start, telling me that it can't find the app, even though it's sitting right there. But watch this. If I type export flask app equals, and then the name of the file that it's looking for, mds-flask demo.py. Now when I run it, it works. Unfortunately, setting the environment variable this way is temporary. Once I kill the terminal window where I exported, it's gone. Setting an environment variable permanently in macOS isn't very easy, and it seems like each release changes the process. The most widely accepted practice is to edit a file in your user folder. The problem here is, again, doing it this way is effectively setting for a user, not the whole system. This bothered me for a few minutes, and then I realized that nobody deploys to a Mac in production. If you do, you're definitely in the minority. Way back in 2002, Apple sold rack-mount versions of their Mac hardware, and they offered a beefier version of OS X called OS X Server. But this has long since gone the way of the dodo. So on a Mac, setting in your profile will have to do. The other thing to realize is that Mac OS is effectively two different operating systems smashed together. There's the nice pretty Cocoa GUI side that we use for graphical apps, and then there's the shell. Apple has seriously limited the way they interoperate, so setting an environment variable that can be seen by a program or script running in the terminal may not be readily available to graphical apps. Again, this worried me because I want to make sure that you get the whole story. And again, I decided the coders who need that interoperability aren't web developers. It's Tux's turn next. In Ubuntu Linux, which is my personal favorite for deploying production servers and VMs, setting the environment variables is similar to what we just did on the Mac. Except in Linux, there is a way to set the variables globally. you can, of course, do a temporary, and that's exactly the same as on macOS using the export command. Here's the same problem in Linux we've been solving. And like the Mac, I can export the variable that it wants. Now it works. But we want system-wide changes. For this, you're going to need to edit etc environment. Add the variables you want to export, save your file, and then ideally reboot your system. There is one gotcha I want to mention. I run a big web application using Flask and Green Unicorn. The startup process for this in production is fairly elaborate. I intend to make a video showing you how this works, but for now, I'll mention that in this particular corner case, the environment variables set on the system were not available to the process running in Green Unicorn. If you find yourself in that situation, there are a few workarounds. You can inject the environment variables in your start script. You can also forego environment variables entirely and use a custom configuration file. I don't personally like either option, but it is what it is. Corner cases aside, you can use environment variables to store anything that might be different from computer to computer. For example, on my development computer, my local database software either has no security or minimal security on it, but in production, I use strong passwords and I store those in environment variables. This allows me to access my database password as a variable stored on the computer, so it can be different on each machine, and also so it isn't visible in my Git repository. Effectively, this means that I can run my local laptop just as easily as a staging or production server with no code changes and no configuration files to manage. Now that we've seen how to set our environment variables, let's look at how we use them in code. Let's start with Java. You just use the system.getEnv and then replace what I have here, env_name, with the name of the environment variable that you want to get. In Python 3, it's very similar. You have to import the OS package, and then you use os.environ, and then inside of square brackets and a set of quotes, add the environment variable name that you want to grab. In C#, it's environment.getEnvironmentVariable, and then the name of the environment variable that you want. And finally, JavaScript running in Node.js, it's process.env, and then the environment variable inside of quotes. If you found value in this video, if you learned something new, help me out with a like and subscribe. For more videos on software development and DevOps from a developer's perspective, check us out at maddevskills.com or on Twitter @devskills.